Imagine you're sitting in a movie theater. The lights are low, the theater is nearly full, and the movie is terrible. Not disappointing, not simply different from what you expected. You genuinely do not want to be there. You check your watch. You've already been sitting there for nearly an hour. There are still 40 minutes left, and for a moment, you consider leaving. You could walk outside, get something to eat, call a friend, go home, do almost anything you would enjoy more than watching the rest of this movie. Then a thought appears, almost automatically. I paid $20 for this ticket, and somehow that matters. You already spent the money. You already drove to the theater. You already watched an hour of the movie. Leaving now feels like wasting all of it. So you stay. Another 10 minutes, then 20. And eventually, the credits roll. You stand up and leave the theater, having spent $20 and nearly 2 hours on an experience you knew an hour earlier you no longer wanted. But consider something strange. When you first thought about leaving, the $20 was already gone. Staying couldn't bring it back. Leaving couldn't make it disappear. And the hour you had already spent was gone too. Nothing you did next could recover either one. There was only one thing you could still influence: the next 40 minutes. And yet, instead of deciding what to do with the time you still had, you allowed the time and money you could never recover to help make the decision. Why? Human beings make decisions by looking backward far more often than we realize. We invest money, time, effort, energy, emotion, reputation, years. And once we have invested enough, walking away can begin to feel almost impossible. A company spends millions developing a product that isn't working. Another investment might still save the project, so they spend it. A homeowner begins a renovation. Costs rise, problems multiply. But after everything already spent, stopping now feels unthinkable. A student spends years preparing for a profession, only to discover they don't actually want the life waiting at the end of it. But changing direction would mean those years were for nothing, or so it feels. We do this with careers, projects, investments, possessions, relationships, plans, sometimes even beliefs. The more we have already given something, the harder it can become to ask whether it still deserves anything more. Psychologists and economists have a name for this pattern: the sunk cost fallacy. A sunk cost is something already spent that cannot be recovered. Money already paid, time already passed, effort already expended. And a perfectly rational decision, those costs should not determine what happens next, because the past cannot be changed. Only the future can. And yet, again and again, we allow yesterday's investment to influence tomorrow's choice. Not because continuing is necessarily better, but because stopping can make everything we already invested feel wasted. And that creates a remarkable psychological trap. Because sometimes, the more a decision costs us, the more determined we become to keep paying for it. To understand why sunk costs can become so powerful, we have to understand what walking away means psychologically. Suppose you buy an expensive ticket to a concert. On the night of the show, you're exhausted. It's raining. The venue is an hour away. And if someone offered you a free ticket to that exact same concert tonight, you might politely decline. But you didn't get a free ticket. You paid $200. And suddenly, staying home feels different. The concert hasn't changed. The weather hasn't changed. Your exhaustion hasn't changed. The only thing that changed is the existence of a cost you cannot recover. But now, not going can feel like losing $200, even though the money is already gone. This is where sunk costs begin to overlap with something we've already encountered: loss aversion. We dislike losses more than equivalent gains tend to please us. And abandoning something we have invested in can force us to acknowledge a loss. Continuing offers another possibility. Maybe it will work. Maybe things will improve. Maybe the investment will eventually prove worthwhile. Maybe we won't have to admit that what we already spent is gone. And that word, admit, matters. Because sunk costs aren't only about economics. They can become tied to identity. Imagine you've spent 5 years building a business. You told your family it would succeed. You told your friends. Maybe you left a secure job. You invested savings, worked weekends, missed dinners, made sacrifices that once seemed temporary. Then one day, you look at the numbers and something has changed. Not one bad month, not one setback. The evidence is accumulating. The business may never become what you believed it would. Now imagine someone asks, if you weren't already running this company, knowing everything you know today, would you start it? And your answer is no. That should tell you something. But another voice immediately answers, what about the last 5 years? What about the money? What about everything I sacrificed? What will people think? Notice what just happened. The question was about the future, but the answer came from the past. And this can create a dangerous loop. The more we invest, the harder it becomes to leave. The harder it becomes to leave, the more we invest. And every additional investment becomes another reason to continue. Not because the future has become more promising, but because the past has become more expensive. This pattern is sometimes called escalation of commitment. When a course of action begins failing, we might imagine that failure would make us less committed. But under certain conditions, the opposite can happen. We become more committed. We add money, add time, add effort. Defend the decision. Search for evidence that persistence will eventually be rewarded. And persistence is usually something we admire. We teach children not to quit. We celebrate people who refuse to give up. We tell stories about perseverance because perseverance really can matter. Many worthwhile things are difficult before they become successful. So the problem isn't that persistence is irrational. The problem is that persistence and entrapment can feel remarkably similar from the inside. Both say, keep going. Both say, you've come too far to stop now. Both say, don't let everything you've done be for nothing. But only one asks the question that actually matters. From where I stand right now, is the next dollar, the next hour, the next year still worth spending? Because the money behind you cannot be recovered. The time behind you cannot be reclaimed. The effort behind you cannot be undone. The decision is never really whether to waste the past. The past has already happened. The decision is whether the future deserves anything more. There is a reason sunk costs are so difficult to ignore, because walking away rarely feels like a neutral decision. It can feel like a verdict. Imagine you've spent 3 years working toward a promotion. You've taken on extra assignments, stayed late, missed weekends, accepted responsibilities no one asked you to accept. And throughout those 3 years, you've told yourself the same thing. It will be worth it. Then another company offers you a better job, better pay, better hours, more interesting work. And if you were choosing between the two jobs for the first time today, the answer might be obvious. But you're not choosing for the first time. You're choosing after 3 years. And suddenly, another question appears. If I leave now, what were those 3 years for? That question sounds reasonable, but notice what it does. It takes 3 years that cannot be changed and quietly gives them a vote in a decision about tomorrow. This is one of the strange psychological powers of sunk costs. We don't merely invest resources, we often invest meaning. The hours become evidence of commitment. The sacrifices become evidence of character. The difficulty becomes evidence that the goal must matter. And eventually, abandoning the goal can begin to feel like abandoning the person who pursued it. That is much harder. Psychologists sometimes describe part of this process through something called cognitive dissonance. We prefer our actions and our beliefs to make sense together. If I sacrificed enormously for something, I would like to believe that something was worth sacrificing for. Otherwise, I am left with an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe I spent money I shouldn't have spent. Maybe I devoted years to something that wasn't working. Maybe I defended a decision long after the evidence changed. And so the mind searches for another interpretation. Maybe success is just around the corner. Maybe I haven't given it enough time. Maybe quitting now would be the real mistake. Sometimes those things are true. That is what makes the sunk cost fallacy so difficult to recognize. Because perseverance really can produce extraordinary results. Businesses sometimes require years before becoming profitable. Relationships sometimes survive difficult periods. Careers sometimes improve after long stretches of frustration. A difficult degree may still be worth completing. The lesson cannot simply be, when things become difficult, quit. The real question is different. If everything I have already invested disappeared from the calculation, would the evidence in front of me still justify continuing? That question is uncomfortable because it removes the story. It removes the sacrifice. It removes the pride. It removes the need to make yesterday look correct and leaves only tomorrow. Economists have a particularly cold way of expressing this. Past costs are irrelevant to future decisions. Psychologically, that can sound almost absurd, because our past does matter. It teaches us, shapes us, changes what we know, changes what we're capable of doing. But there is an important distinction. The lessons from the past may be valuable. The information we gained may be valuable. The skills we developed may be valuable. The cost itself is not a reason to pay another cost. $100,000 already spent does not make the next $10,000 a better investment. 5 years already devoted to something does not automatically make the 6th year worth giving. And staying in the theater for 60 miserable minutes does not make the final 40 any more enjoyable. The past can inform the decision, but it cannot justify it. And once we understand that distinction, something else becomes visible. Because sunk costs don't only trap individuals. Sometimes they trap entire organizations. Imagine a company launches an ambitious new project. A team is hired, a budget is approved, months of work begin. Then, the evidence changes. Costs rise, deadlines slip, customers aren't responding. The company could stop, but stopping would mean acknowledging that everything already invested may never produce the return everyone expected. So, another budget is approved, more time is given, the strategy is revised, and strangely, the project becomes harder to cancel, not easier. Because now there is more at stake, more money, more labor, more reputations, and more people who once said, "This will work." Psychologists call this escalation of commitment, and organizations add something particularly powerful to it: accountability. Imagine you approved the original investment. You defended it. Your name is attached to it. Now you're being asked whether to stop. Ending the project may be rational, but psychologically, it can feel like publicly declaring, "I was wrong." So we try again. One more quarter, one more redesign, one more investment. And every attempt to rescue the past creates another sunk cost that makes the next decision harder. But money isn't the only thing we protect this way. We do it with careers, relationships, plans, reputations, even beliefs. The details change, the psychological question does not. Am I continuing because the future still justifies the investment, or because walking away would force me to accept what I have already lost? And that leads to the hardest question of all. How do we know when persistence is courage and when persistence is simply the past refusing to let go? So how do you know? When is continuing courage? And when is it the sunk cost fallacy? One question can help. If I had not already invested anything, would I choose this today? Imagine the money returned to your account, the years removed from the calculation, the reputation, the pride, the need to prove yourself right, temporarily gone. Now look only at what comes next. Would you still spend the next dollar? Would you still give the next year? Would you still choose this path? If the answer is yes, continue. Not because of what you've already given, but because what lies ahead is still worth choosing. And if the answer is no, then continuing cannot recover the past. It can only add to its cost. This doesn't mean our previous investments were meaningless. A failed business can teach you. A changed career can shape you. A relationship that ends can still have mattered. Years spent pursuing the wrong destination may have helped create the person who can finally recognize the right one. Value and continuation are not the same thing. Something can have mattered enormously and still be finished. Perhaps that is what makes sunk costs so deeply human. We don't want our sacrifices to have been for nothing, so we keep paying, hoping the next investment will somehow justify the last one. But the past doesn't need to be rescued. It needs to be understood. The money is gone. The hour has passed. The years have already become part of you, and none of them can tell you what tomorrow deserves. Only you, standing where you are now, can decide that. So the next time you hear yourself say, "I've already put too much into this to stop now," ask one more question. If I were choosing today, would I choose it again? Because sometimes walking away isn't wasting everything you've invested. It's simply refusing to let the past spend your future.